ICQ Podcast episode 369, Amateur TV and the British Amateur TV Club. Well, hello fellow amateur ham radio enthusiasts, and welcome to this, our 369th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Wes Nairn and our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M0MNG is joined by Edmund Mike 0, Mike November Golf, Ed DD5 Lima Papa, and Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo to discuss the latest amateur ham radio news. Myself, Colin M6BLY, rounds up the news in brief, and in this episode we have a feature and a discussion with Dave CRUMP Golf 8 Golf Kilo Quebec about amateur TV and the British Amateur Television Club. Now, as always, it's your very kind donations that keep your amateur radio show advert-free and running nicely here on the internet. And this episode, we'd like to thank Wes Nairn, along with our monthly subscription donors, for their very kind donation. So he set up a subscription donation to us, so we really would appreciate him, and as I thank him for what he does for us all. If you would like to show your support for the show, it's very, very simple. Have a think about the value you got from the show. Turn that into a monetary value, and then head along to icqpodcast.com/donate and then say anything you send along our way. It'll be greatly appreciated. Right, now we're going to move on with the show, and we're going to join Martin, Edmund, Ed and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur ham radio news, including amateurs appointed to the FCC panel and the latest on airlines and 5G. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to this episode's News Roundtable. This is the News Roundtable for episode 369. So we're still...
No way, Martin. 369, did you say?
369, Leslie. 369. You wait till we're about 94 each, mate, and we're doing episode 5004, you know. It'll get there, Leslie. Don't you worry about it. We'll still be doing it if the listeners are there. Trust me. So we have Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB. Hi, Leslie.
Good evening, Martin. Pleasure to be on, as always.
Yeah, good to have you. We also have Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP. Hi, Ed.
Yeah, hi, Martin. You know what 369 is? It's 3 times 1, 2, 3.
That's true. That's true. And the thing got me a few episodes back that if you listen to one episode a day, it would take you over a year now to listen to them all. And by the time you listen to them all, we'd have another 26 in the bag. So, yeah.
Oh, dear.
There's a lot out there. But last but not least, we got Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, good to have you. Unfortunately, Dan got called away for work, so Dan Romachik, KB6NU, can't join us. And I had an email from Ruth today saying, unfortunately, she couldn't make it. So we'll do our best not to butcher the American stories too much, but we'll go and see what we can do.
I'm sure if we get it wrong, Martin, they'll tell us in their own gentle way.
They will. Listen, a baseball bat round, yeah.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. Oh, we got to behave, Leslie. Okay, first news story. 2 radio amateurs appointed to the FCC and Technological Advisory Council. Now, I actually like this because I know that Ofcom have amateurs working for them, but it's different between having amateurs working for you and actually appointing a couple of people to be part of you. It kind of gives our hobby credibility a little bit. What do you think, Leslie?
Right, I'm just going through the story. They've appointed Greg Lapin, N5GL, and Michelle Thompson, W5NYV. Lapin chairs the ARRL Safety Committee, and it also talks about OET 65, OET Bulletin number 65, which I was very much aware of when I was doing that work on RF safety. And when I pointed out it was in the manuals that radio people use all the time, they looked at me really puzzled. Where did this come from? You know. But I think it's a good thing. What it does is it gets two people in there that can advise on amateur radio. Obviously, the powers that be make their decisions. It's fair enough. But at the very, very least, it means that the amateur community has an input. And that's sometimes the most we can ask for. We may not be able to change the direction of things, but, sometimes we can sort of push things in the right direction, if that makes sense, Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, as I said, it's nice that we've been, as amateurs, some of our brethren or cousins across the pond have been requested to join this, been appointed. That, to me, is the big thing. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Well, congratulations first and foremost to the two people involved, and hopefully that will put the idea into other regulators' heads around the world. I've just read the story, and although it's implied, it doesn't say explicitly that they were, or at least I don't think it says explicitly that they were appointed because they were radio amateurs and the expertise that brings, rather than, for example, just being appointed for a different reason, and happily they happen to be radio amateurs as well. But hopefully it's the former of those that is the case, and the very best of luck to them.
Yeah, that's a good one. Ed, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just following on from what Edmund says, and I think it's probably quite right what he said, because looking at the very last sentence, or last but one sentence in the article, it says the TAC will consider and advise the FCC on topics such as 6G, artificial intelligence, advanced spectrum sharing technologies, and emerging wireless technologies. So that would, to me, that suggests that the two people, Greg Lappin and Michelle Thompson, have something to do in one of those areas in modern technology. And okay, that they're radio amateurs as well, but I don't think they will have been appointed because they're radio amateurs, but rather that they are leaders in their own field. And it's nice that. Why did they ever get in those fields? Probably because they had amateur radio as a hobby as children and moved up into technology, which is a plus point for amateur radio generally across the world. It does get people interested in technology, and without that kick into technology, you won't have experts.
Very, very much so. I mean, you get a youngster that gets the radio amateur bug, and then they go to college to study engineering or radio communications or electronics, and then the career snowballs on from there. It's a bit difficult to prove that factually in terms of numbers, but it does very much happen.
Yeah, it's not just youngsters, though, in fairness.
Yes.
I think the thing is, if somebody tips up to your club and you show them a lot of enthusiasm, you're an enthusiastic bunch, you're more likely to attract people of any age. And, it is interesting sometimes when I sit here sometimes and listen to people saying all sorts of things, and you think they really don't understand what they're talking about, because that defies the laws of physics. Radio waves don't work like that. But most people think that way. So, anyway, there you go. What wouldn't we?
It's a good story, Martin, and I really do wish them well in their new position, and hopefully everyone benefits. It's a win-win.
I think so, and I hope so too. Right, move to our next news story. Well, it's kind of not a new news story. This one's run for the last 2 episodes and is running again now.
It certainly has, Martin.
Yeah, and I didn't think it was going to be as big a problem as it appears to start to be, but US Airlines warn impending 5G flight disruptions. Now, Ed, you kind of found some more bits after I put this up, but I was looking at, there's quite a few airlines that were joining together and picking the fight on this one, saying it was dangerous to fly. You found a whole load of other stories as well, haven't you, Ed?
Yeah, and it wasn't the airlines so much as the aircraft manufacturers. The world's two largest aircraft manufacturers, Airbus and Boeing, both went to the FCC and said, "Hey, Verizon and AT&T and others want to install 5G equipment using the C-band, which I think is 3.7 to 4 gigahertz approximately, for their 5G cell phone towers near airports. We got a problem. We believe, since we use the same frequency for our altimeters, that there could be interference, and when planes are trying to land in bad visibility, any interference with that equipment could have fatal consequences." So despite the fact that the frequency range was sold by the FCC to the various cell phone companies, I think about 2 years ago, or certainly over a year ago, for goodness knows how many millions or billions of dollars, all of a sudden they're getting told, well, sorry, you can't use it, certainly not near airports. There's been court cases. There's been an agreement between them that they'll delay the rollout of the 5G or run lower power in certain areas by certain airports. But the very, very latest that came out yesterday from the FAA is that now they intend to not allow, to prohibit certain aircraft that they know will be vulnerable, and these are some Boeing 747 models, so 747-8 and the 747-8F and the 777 aircraft, from landing at airports where 5G interference could occur. So anywhere where C-band 5G cell towers are put in close to airports, the FAA will not allow those aircraft, and possibly other models as well, but that's all that's in their announcement. Go to the FAA website at www.faa.gov, newsroom, FAA statements-5G, and you can read it yourself. But that's a pretty extreme almost move from the FAA. They obviously believe this is dangerous, despite the fact that there are 5G cell towers near airports in other parts of the world, but I believe in other parts of the world the power level is less. In any case, this is a story that probably will be discussed in the next or the one after the next ICQ podcast as well, because it's definitely ongoing. There's doesn't seem to be an actual agreement, and a lot of worry. I did also hear that there was a certain number of the altimeters in a large proportion of the large airliners have been checked and probably won't be affected by 5G cell transmitters. But, you know, even if it's only 20% that are affected, you don't want to be in that aircraft. So, back to you, Martin.
Yeah. I know when we were discussing, you were saying that you thought it was something like 20% of aircraft, all the modern aircraft would suffer from this problem. But some of the older airlines and some of the third world countries that are flying into our airspace, that could be quite worrying. And when you say if it's 20% could be affected, and take an airport like Heathrow where you've got at least, on busy times, at least one plane a minute landing, that's every 5 minutes you've got a plane coming in which may have a defective altimeter due to the fact of interference. And putting it that way. And it's not only passenger planes as well. I think what will also happen is you will end up with passenger planes obviously delayed, but you'll also end up with cargo planes that might not get into the airport near where they're supposed to go, which then means you've got an increased transport cost from some obscure airport to where they've got to go. So I think not only have we got safety issues, but potentially pricing issues as well. What do you think, Leslie?
Well, I've been listening to interest. I mean, I'm not an aircraft person. I'm not been involved in any of that sort of thing at all. I'm really been involved with the railways, critical safety systems. And I can say that it is not easy to change systems. Everything has to be type approved. Not only whatever the device is that you fit into, let's say, an aircraft or a rail, a train, but it's the way it's fitted as well can be critical. You have to put looms in a certain direction, in a certain position. You can't just do what you like. Whereas we do radio amateurs, everything has to be approved of an approved way of fitting. It is difficult. We originally thought it was due to people on the aircraft using their mobile phones. That's purely, from the reports there, it's not the case. It's from the mast affecting certain types of altimeter, as Ed quite rightly said. I think the government departments and the various bodies from the aircraft need to get together and to try and sort this out, and get round the table, because it's the only way it's going to be sorted. Eventually, yes, it will be done, but I don't think it's going to be an easy fix. Over to you, Martin.
No. And I was talking to one of our listeners in Canada the other day, Simon, and he was saying, you'd think they had done their tests and worked out before they release 5G frequencies for this sort of thing, wouldn't you?
Well,
but yeah, Simon's right.
Just to be clear, these are only the 3.7 gig to 4 gigahertz C-band,
yes.
so XTV,
yes.
satellite band frequencies. 5G can operate on other frequencies. Yeah.
But we still need to be aware of it, because not only that, and I was going to say, Edmund, the BBC have also put their two penneth into the Transport Secretary here in the UK and starting to make noises about this as well, haven't they?
Well, yes, I must confess I hadn't paid much attention to this story previously for rather selfish reasons, one of them being that I've probably flown on half a dozen flights in my entire life, and on top of that, with my track record with smartphone technology, I will probably get my first 5G smartphone at around about the time that it's decided that that's old and obsolete technology and is being on the point of being withdrawn. If technology, if something's hot in 2022, I'll probably get my hands on it about 5+ years later, because I'm too mean to spend any money, you see. But leaving that aside, the thing that really made me sit up and notice was when, as Martin correctly alluded to just there, this did make the headlines. I was listening to one of the major news bulletins on Radio 4 last week, I think it was, and it wasn't the top story, but it was right up there as one of the top stories. It wasn't the kind of "and finally" item right at the very end. So I think that's what really brought it home to me. And there's nothing I can really add other than I'm slightly surprised that if people are concerned about the cell towers, I'm rather surprised that they aren't equally concerned about people using or attempting to use 5G phones whilst on board the plane. I appreciate that the cell towers run a lot higher power probably than the mobile phones do, and I also appreciate that the passengers with their 5G phones will hopefully be on the inside of the plane, which will act as a kind of Faraday cage, because let's face it, something will have gone pretty badly wrong if they're on the outside with their 5G phones. And I realise that the altimeters are on the outside of the plane, but even so, if the field strengths from cell towers are causing this much concern, then surely there ought to be concern as well about passengers with phones on the inside of the plane, shouldn't there be?
You are actually told to turn them off.
Yeah, well, lots of people on the planet are told to do lots of things, but what happens, what's supposed to happen in theory and what actually does happen in practice can be two very different things. So
Indeed.
Are they just saying turn it off and hoping that everybody complies?
Well, if they don't comply, it's actually a criminal offence. I don't know if it's criminal, but it's an offence they can be charged.
Yeah. They're very, very rightly touchy on aircraft safety, and if somebody's messing about, they can stop the aircraft, return it back, and the passenger ejected. But there you go.
Yeah, I worked at Gatwick for a while when I was between jobs, and interestingly enough, the amount of phones we found in pushchair hoods, where they folded the pushchair up to put in the cargo hole in the mobile phone, are still on, and you'd switch them off. You'd switch them off, and you'd take them down and to the gate, and you'd give them to the stewardess and say, "There you go, deal with that one." But people do silly things; they just don't think. That's half the problem. But as somebody who has a 5G mast about 50 meters from his house, I suppose I ought to be a little bit worried, but I refuse to be a tin hat brigade, Leslie. So there you go.
Put an altimeter in your front room.
Yeah, the point is, in Europe, the majority of the 5G is actually upgraded 4G.
Yeah.
So using like 800 megs or 1800 megs, not 3.7, although it is used in France, which is the comparison that Verizon and AT&T used. Said, well, in France they're using it near airports, but in fact, a lot lower power levels. Yeah. So power level is the important thing here, and a small mobile phone isn't that powerful in the case that one person on a plane has his phone still turned on. It actually won't do anything until the cell tower sees it. The problem is, or one of the problems that was covered actually in the last show as well, is that the new 5G systems on the cell towers have steerable antennas. So not only are you going to be thumping out hundreds or thousands of watts, or maybe not thousands, but hundreds of watts, there also can be directional and with a high gain antenna. So the ERP hitting the plane at 3.7 gigahertz from a cell tower, it's maybe, let's say, 500 meters away while it's landing, is going to be a lot higher than coming from the phone inside the plane.
And I suppose to make that worse, more than one cell tower could hear the mobile phone, so multiple cell towers
are locking
could all
onto
beam at the same time towards the same aircraft. Oops.
Yep.
Well, that was always one of the things that they used to say to you. Don't switch your phone on a mobile phone on a plane, because if you were near a window and you had it on, even if it didn't affect the plane, you could be connected to umpteen cell towers across, say, Europe, because of your height and just straight line of sight. You could be umpteen cell towers, and you could be getting bills for roaming into countries you shouldn't have never been in.
I've been there, done that.
Oh, it was you, was it?
Yeah, when I went to Jersey and went on the Azora, I went on a cruise ship, and as you find, you don't want to switch your mobile phone on, because suddenly the cell phones all click on, and you find yourself you're either on the maritime network, which is some horrendous amount of money. All these cell phones comes on and says, "Welcome to so and so," and you go, "No, I don't want to. It's costing me a lot of money," and you immediately switch it off.
Yeah, so same thing happens from many of the SOTA summits in southern Germany.
Yeah,
you'll quite often connect to Austria or Switzerland. In the case of Austria, it's not a problem because it's part of the EEC or the EU, and they've uniform prices.
Yes.
But Switzerland hasn't. Switzerland's expensive, so if it connects to Switzerland, turn it off.
Yeah, I did an Echo Link from Jersey, and that was like a few minutes, and that cost me £8. It's like, no.
Interesting. The last bit was really just financial.
I think this story is going to run and run, Martin.
I think you could be right, and I think, all right, it's not an amateur radio story, it's a safety story that affects a lot of us. But equally, we are the people that understand this sort of thing, and we may be in a position to educate people we know in the family or friends or colleagues at work when they're struggling to understand why. So I think this is an important story, although it's not amateur radio. I think it's an important story that we run with, because I think we will end up having to be the educators. There you go. That's my words on it. Okay, next news story, a little bit interesting, and this happened a little while ago, but Ares activated as fire destroyed 1,000 Colorado homes. Now, I don't normally sort of think of fires like this happening in the winter. They normally, to me, happen in the summer. Yeah, but as I say, the amateur boys were out doing this. What do you think, Edmund?
Well, I don't really know what to say about this one, other than the thing that really jumped out at me, which is a minor detail, I suppose, in the grand scheme of the news story, is that the gentleman they interviewed, or who is quoted here, I'm just scrolling down on my computer, which has decided to run slowly. That's Jim Andrews, Kilo Hotel 6 Hotel Tango Victor. They describe him as an amateur TV enthusiast rather than an amateur radio enthusiast. So that just got me thinking in the context of, I suppose the equivalent would be Raynet in the UK, wouldn't it? If a major incident was going on, is there scope to use amateur television, whether that's fast scan television or indeed slow scan television? I know that the fast scan boys would say quite rightly that slow scan TV is not amateur TV as such, but is there scope to use either of those in disaster relief as opposed to the more traditional voice modes? I wonder, Martin, back to you.
Well, I don't really know, Edmund. In fairness, Edmund, I interviewed a gentleman for the feature for this episode at Amateur TV, and David, we never really got around. David and I never really got onto the subject of emergency stuff. I know he did tell me that slow scan is not real ATV, but yeah, it could have a place. But I think, predominantly you want to get in and out quick. So you'd set up your base stations, I would suggest, in a Raynet or Ares emergency system away from the fire, and then communicate in with handy talkies probably for the last sort of 5 to 10 miles, I would guess. Well, that's how I would see it done. So I'm not sure amateur TV would, but it could be, Edmund, I would suggest. What do you think, Leslie?
Well, I was just reading through the story, Martin, and you just think about destroying 1,000 homes. I mean, that's a huge, huge fire. I'm reading through this as well. What he said that let me just find it. He said that this was not a typical forest fire, but an urban firestorm. Thousands of people were evacuated, and the commercial systems, loss of commercial communication within 8 hours. Battery backup system for cell phones and landlines failed, and the 911 services also went down. It just shows you the value of amateur radio. And we can set up our systems very, very quickly, connect it to a car battery. You've got a HF set or VHF set, or, connect it to a car battery, and we're up and running. We used to do it at camp, sort of within about 20 minutes, we could get something up and running, and then give a bit more time, and put a more efficient antenna up. But this does really show the utility of amateur radio and how it can be useful. I hope it went well. I hope nobody was injured and everybody got out safely. we don't really want to use amateur radio in emergency situations. We'd much rather the equipment be in a box and never be used. But if it ever needs to, it's there. And I'd like to say thank you for the guys, girls and guys for helping out from ARES. Well done to them. And then get the system back up and running again and get everybody out safely. And this is about what community support is all about. Well done.
Yeah, you're right, Leslie. We can get on the air very, very quickly. I was out doing some HF the other day with just a mobile whip on top of the car, working all over Europe. So, you know, it can happen. Right, so our next news story, and one that I kind of think it sounds interesting. Bit cold for me, though. But the Germans are doing a DXpedition to the North Pole, or as near as they can get anyway. So, since you live in Germany, Ed, let you go first on this one.
Yeah, okay. This is a story about Martina, DF3TS, and Thomas, DC8TM. They're heading up to Svalbard, which is an island way, way up north from Norway and Sweden, in the Arctic Circle, and not that far from the North Pole. They're actually heading to a Russian research base, and they have a special call sign for there, and they'll be operating I think they'll be visiting and working, so to speak, and when they get time, they're going to try and get on to the HF bands on sideband and FT8. And yeah, they've got a special event call sign, DP0LE, but they'll also be using some Russian call signs as well. So it is quite an undertaking to actually head up there, especially at this time of year. But actually, reading this, it's April. It's happening, so it'll be the springtime. So not quite as cold as it is up there at the moment. Yeah, there'll be some call signs to listen out for, and we obviously wish them all the best of luck and a safe trip. And you know, in general, when people put on DXpeditions, a lot of them are doing it at their own cost, and a lot of organisation work, and it's fun for them, but really they're providing a service to the rest of the amateur radio community, in this case, obviously worldwide. So a lot of people will be trying to get this worldwide flora and fauna area, and it obviously isn't activated that often. And we say good luck to them, and take care. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I think it's a good one, and it sounds interesting. I'll say, a bit cold for me because I don't like being too cold. I don't like being too hot either. So I'm a miserable devil, really. Edmund, not a special event station, but probably one worth getting in the log, I would suggest. What do you think?
Well, not a special event station, but the next best thing, and I would echo everything that the other Ed said there about the cost and effort involved in putting on an expedition like this. So the very best of luck to them. Hope that it does turn out to be third time lucky. And D-Pole, Delta Papa Zero Lima Echo, is a wonderful call sign. I'm not at all jealous. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah. You've got a few call signs you use. Some of them are pretty good as well. What are you on about? But it's great fun. Now, Leslie, sometimes you say, this is not my part of amateur radio because it's like not HF, but this has got to be HF, Leslie, I reckon.
Yes, it's definitely HF. I had to look on the map to see where it was. I mean, was it about 5 years ago? I had a friend from the radio club was on an expedition there, and she wanted to get her license before she went. So we were frantically going through the foundation and immediate license. But if you go onto Google Images, it gives you the pictures of the place, and it's like, a bit cold for me. But I hope the expedition goes well, and I'll tell you right now, it's going to require an awful lot of work. you can't just pop home and get new cables or anything like that. Everything you take with you's got to work with some spares as well. So I've no doubt there's an awful lot of organisation in the background, and I really do hope it goes well, and hopefully we can work it from the club. Yay!
Yeah, it'll be a good one, and let's say something to look forward to, because I think we need some things to look forward to now, going into 2022. So that'll be a good one. Right, last news story. Is it amateur radio or is it real radio? I'll leave it up to all of us to decide. Yeah, researchers build the world's smallest antenna using DNA. So, Ed, do you want to go first on this one again?
Yep, can do. This is a article about research at the University of Montreal in Canada. And they've actually said they've created the world's tiniest antenna. And they've done it by engineering DNA. And the reason they've done it is so they can get signals out of the body, or to different parts of the body when things happen. So they've built a DNA-based nano antenna that's synthesized, and it basically, they're saying it almost acts like what we would call a repeater, in so much as it receives light on one wavelength and transmits it back on another, because they're using light rather than normal radio frequency transmissions. So it's basically a solution looking for a reason to happen in many ways, I guess. But as people go more and more into research into the smaller parts of the body and the DNA, and trying to find better ways to cure diseases, having this sort of ability to communicate to different parts where sensors are in the body, etc., this is something that's really almost science. Well, it is science fiction, but they're actually getting some success. They've really got something built in the lab, and good luck to them. It's not amateur radio at all, but the kind of things that they consider with these antennas is exactly what we do with radio antennas. The using light rather than radio, but a lot of the same rules apply. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah. Well, I like this story because, as I say, I've had many a discussion with people telling them that their eyes are a pair of radio receivers and the brain decodes the signal high. But in fairness, you're dead right. These are, as they float through your body, they will be mobile repeaters in some ways. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
Well, off the top of your head then, no cheating. If the wavelength is 5 nanometers, what's the frequency?
Oh, don't ask me difficult questions. That's the sort of thing you're going to ask me in the quiz, isn't it?
Maybe. Well, I think the highest frequency amateur radio band that we've actually had contacts on in the UK is something like 241 gigahertz, which is only a millimetric wavelength rather than nanometric. But I think you can get notices of variation to go higher. I seem to remember reading that somewhere in the last few days. So maybe there's a notice of variation going for the 5 nanometer band. But the sky's the limit, isn't it? Who knows? I mean, 100 years ago, if you'd told people that you could have QSOs on frequencies well into the gigahertz range over hundreds of miles, they would have probably thought that you were completely mad. So what's to say that in 100 years from now, we might, as amateurs, not be doing things on frequency bands with nanometric wavelengths, but beyond that, it melts my brain, basically, Martin, so I can't think of anything sensible to say.
That's an inopportune phrase.
In a manner of speaking.
Yeah, but the thing being is that, we should understand, if somebody gave us a lecture on this, we'd understand a lot of it because we could relate it to the knowledge we have in radio, because, all right, it's much higher frequencies, much smaller antennas, but it's the same principles predominantly. But Leslie, unfortunately, you won't have 132 feet of wire around your body when this is happening, right?
I'm reading this story. I find it absolutely. I play with HF. I always look. That's my game. But I find this absolutely mind-boggling. Will the research? I mean, that's why you need universities to look at these things and to push the envelope. And 10 or 20 years down the line, like we have with lasers and all sorts of things, these things start to find applications we just didn't think of or even dream of. So there's part of me that goes, wow, I don't get this. But there's the other part of me, well, there could be something in it. Just let the universities run with it and see where it goes.
Yeah, I think that's well worth a look, quite honestly. And yeah, it's quite surprising how technology has moved on. Even in the last 20 years, let's be honest. I mean, amateur radio 20 years ago isn't what it is now. Yeah, the old boys might say, oh, we still thump the brass. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that before somebody emails me. But lots of other things have happened. And, the technology is always moving forward, which makes this hobby so interesting. Right, that concludes our news stories. Let's find out what the boys have been up to since the last time I spoke to them. Ed, what have you been up to over there in Germany?
Well, I'm continuing my saga of building antennas for the HF bands. My latest challenge is a portable antenna for 10 meters as conditions get better. I'm hoping that maybe in a few months, maybe even weeks' time, I might be able to operate 10 meters with a directional beam from a summit, some sort, either SOTA or HEMA. And I've actually sort of taken an existing design and changed it somewhat to fit my requirements for portability. And I've come up with a vertical polarized Moxon antenna. So it's using standard Moxon design, but the way I've got it mounted on two telescopic posts means I can set it up pretty well anywhere and have it so stable that I can move one of the posts, the one with the reflector on, around to point the antenna in different directions. When one is portable, you almost certainly have an antenna that is omnidirectional with no real gain. Having this on 10 meters at least, now I'm probably going to make a 12 and a 15 meter version of it as well, means I've got actually a directional beam I can take with me to the top of a summit, and it packs into the rucksack. So that's my latest thing I'm playing with. Apart from that, I've finished off something I've mentioned in previous editions, the Bluetooth remote control of my Chinese radio. I've added externally full Bluetooth control, both remote control of the radio and audio in and out. And that's all working now, and also got moved into a smaller box again to make it portable. That'll enable me to leave the radio in the rucksack, plug the antenna into it, turn it on, and then operate walking around, which sounds like a bit of a silly thing to want to do, but when it's cold and wet, that is actually quite an advantage. And I'm actually starting to read a book, and I know we do book reviews. No, Frank does book reviews occasionally on here, and this one's it's not totally amateur radio, but it's a very famous amateur radio operator from Australia, Dick Smith. And there's a book now called Dick Smith, My Adventurous Life, and this is VK2DIK. And to quote Paul Hogan, he says, part Bear Gillis, part Bill Gates, but 100% Aussie larrikin. And Dick is a great innovator, philanthropist, and adventurer. And, he's an interesting character, if you can say nothing else about the guy, and very keen on supporting amateur radio in Australia. So I'm reading that paper book that I got as a birthday present from my wife. So that was a nice little surprise. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, sounds like you've been extremely busy there. Very busy and great fun. And yeah, Moxons are something I've been reading up about because I've got an idea for something I want to do, but at the moment I seem to be terribly busy on other things. But it's going to go that route at some point in time fairly soon.
Yeah, Moxon's a great antenna because it's simple, cheap to make, and it's really the equivalent of almost better than a 2-element beam.
Yeah,
and but in a smaller form factor, a smaller shear, easier to handle.
Yeah.
So whether it's 6 meters, 2 meters, 20 meters, whatever, it's a really nice antenna.
Yeah, well, I was intending to play with a 2 meter one just to get the feel for it, and if that works, because 2 meters is small enough to play with size wise, and then if I'm getting results, then you can scale it for any other band, which is a good thing.
Exactly, it's a HF and a VHF antenna design.
Yeah, Edmund, what have you been up to?
Very little, Martin. There was some good tropospheric ducting in the middle of January, so on 2 meters FM I got across to the north coast of France and practiced my French a little bit, and on 70 centimetres I managed to get across not to France but to the next village along from where I live, but I ended up talking to the chap who put me forward for the full licence exam in 2013, and it's partly thanks to him that I got the M0 that year, so it was good to catch up on 70 centimetres, which is a very underutilised band, and we could do with having more activity on there, really. Apart from that, one of my New Year's resolutions was to improve my CW, because for the past few years I've been sort of all right, kind of on a good day, at very slow speed, and the new year rolled round and I thought, come on, I can do better than that. I would prefer to be, good rather than mediocre. So I've really been studying since the turn of the year, and I don't find it easy. And head copy is really the hard bit because I'm trying not to write anything down at all. Still get my A's and my N's the wrong way round, and occasionally mistake a D for an L. But it's a case of practice. And I've thought about giving up once or twice, but the trouble with that is normally if you chuck something in, that's the moment when you are quite close to making a breakthrough. And I remember years and years ago when I started to learn French, for a long time I was bashing my head against a brick wall and getting a bit frustrated and seemed to be making little or no progress. And then one night I just went to bed, went to sleep, woke up the following morning, and overnight it was as if somebody had flicked a switch, and effortlessly, or so it felt, I went from driving along in second gear in a clapped out old car down a country lane somewhere to cruising down the motorway at 70 miles an hour in fifth gear, and I never looked back. So that was my experience with French. So I'm hoping that if I keep plugging away at learning CW long enough, eventually something similar will happen. So that's been my experience, and if anybody else out there is trying to learn it, the only advice I would give you is keep going, because let's face it, if it was easy, everybody would do it, and if you don't make lots of mistakes, then you're not trying hard enough. But the studying has taken up the vast majority of my time, really. And one of my ambitions is just to do more amateur radio stuff in 2022 in general. Use bands I don't normally use modes I don't normally use. And part of that is that throughout the month of June, as I understand it, all amateurs in the UK, irrespective of whether they hold foundation, intermediate or full licenses, will optionally be able to apply for a notice of variation to put the letter Q for Queen in their call signs in order to celebrate and commemorate Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth's platinum, I've said platinum, it is platinum, isn't it? Jubilee that's coming up in June 2022, but I'm sure we'll talk more about events connected to that a little bit nearer the time. So that's what I've been doing, Martin. I've been studying and feeling like I'm not making very much progress.
Yeah, well, it sounds like fun, and Morse is something that I have a block on as well. I did speak to, and I think I'm going from memory now, and I'm not going to try for the call sign, but the gentleman, I'm sure his name was Patrick, lives in Austin, Texas, and I was chatting to him the other day on the talk group, and he said, he thoroughly enjoys Morse, and although he was on the digital group chatting to me, he said, I enjoy Morse quite a lot. He said, I've even worked down Romachek. I went, top guy. So, that was nice when he said, and I've even worked down. So that's great. Right. Leslie, what have you been up to?
Oh, well, apart from recovering from my injury that I had a few months back, been very busy on the work front, but on the amateur radio front, I think Edmund is absolutely right about 70 Sems. It's a much underrated band, and people should go out and use it more. I've got equipment for that, and I just love pottering about with that particular band as well. What have I been doing? Well, as you probably know, Martin, I've been messing about with a Raspberry Pi. I thought, you know what, I'd really like to learn a bit more about this and what's going on. And I would like to thank the GQRP Club on the internet, and they put lots of ideas my way of what I could use it for. And I've been going through some of the YouTube stuff as well. So I'm a bit overwhelmed with it all. But it's like anything. We just got to sit down and work through it and try and learn it. Some of this programming stuff I did about 30 years ago. So, oh dear, never mind. It's all about learning, and that's, it's partly what the hobby's about, and self-training and all that. And okay, on the Q call sign, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And hopefully I can get my own club, the Silverthorne Radio Club, to do something along those lines. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, that'll be good, the Q call sign. And yeah, on the Raspberry Pi front, Leslie, once you've got one, it doesn't stop there. I've got 5 running in this house at the moment. So, yes. But they all do certain things. So, there we go. Right, what have I been up to? Well, I sound like a broken record, really. Been working on the talk group. And in fairness, apart from when I've taken it out for a few minutes, but equally I watch what's going on. So hopefully nobody's come along and gone, it's not working, because it is actually working unless I've removed part of the functionality for a few minutes while I'm just doing a bit of testing and bits and pieces. So in fairness, our talk groups are working for all 3 of the main modes, D-Star, DMR and Fusion. So, and nice to hear some of the other people coming back and being, getting the enthusiasm again, because I think when we had a little bit of outages, there were a few nightmares with people not being quite so happy. Well, now, Leslie, you can sit down because you might fall down in a minute. I've had some HF contacts.
Hey!
Yeah. I actually went on HF a couple of times, done some from the house here. I even went out for an hour. I was only out for about an hour and had 4 contacts all over Europe on 17 metres Saturday lunchtime. And Sunday afternoon, I was sitting in a shack working a few and ended up having a chat with an Italian gentleman. Now, anybody who knows about the UK and Italy, the lots of people say, oh, it's because the Italians run mega amounts of power. I think we're just the right skip distance into Italy, that they can hear us and we can hear them pretty well. And it was quite nice because I got an Italian that could speak really good English, but I'm sure he wanted to practice his English on me, and he kept me for well over half an hour, which was great. And it was
great.
He wasn't a 5-9 goodbye. It was a really interesting chat with the guy, so that was good. Been doing lots of club things at the moment, with the Monday night, and have had some committee meetings and one thing and another as we sort a few things out for this year. Hoping for not this episode, but the following episode. I was contacted a couple of weeks ago by a gentleman who's produced a piece of software that runs on a Raspberry Pi, Leslie. And yeah, I'm rather hoping he comes back to me, or if he doesn't, I might actually just review it myself. But I'd rather have his input as well going forward. And last but not least, I'm really looking forward to Hamzilla in March the 13th in the UK. So Sunday, it looks like it's going to be the first rally that I'm going to be able to get to. The ICQ podcast has been invited, and I think you said you're coming as well, Edmund.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll get there, and we'll have a good fun with a bit of luck. So I'm looking forward to it. So that's what I've been up to. So all in all, I think we've all been pretty busy, guys. So all that's left for me to do is to thank you guys for joining me tonight, and say 73 Stu, and we'll move to the next part of the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB.
Thanks for having me on, Martin. Been a blast as always.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Thanks for having me on as well, Martin, and I can't wait for Hamzilla. It's only been 2 years since I went to the last radio rally, but it feels like an eternity, so I can't wait. 7-3.
Yeah, cheers. And last but not least, because the Gremlins did get you in the middle, didn't they, Ed? But Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
I blame the computer systems. We should be doing this on RF, not computer systems. Thanks for inviting me, 73.
Yeah, no problems. Well, we did think about doing it RF early on, but Colin didn't have a license at the time, so that blew that one out. And if you did it on Echo Link, it probably wouldn't be that good, and the audio wouldn't be particularly good. But anyway, that's another story. Right, 73 all, and I'll catch you again soon as we move on to the other part of the podcast. 73.
Cheerio.
73.
7-3.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BLY. We start with news actually in India this week, in Bangalore, where it is good news. Last year they were only able to see 60 candidates from the region try and take their amateur radio exam. Now that seems to be obviously due to the COVID restrictions that caused so much disruption to the hobby over the last couple of years. But great news, already this year they've had approximately 180 candidates expected to sit their exam already this year, so a massive uptake in people potentially to join the hobby. So the director of the Indian Institute of Hams has basically been quoted saying that a lot of the reasons why, because they were able to make the courses very simple to attend, not making people to travel long distance or lose hours in traffic to cater for their interest in the hobby. And this is being utilised in a lot of online learning classes, etc. So great news there of, more hams coming on the air in India. Now in the UK, the RSGB has released its board proceedings, which cover the proceedings for August through to November last year. So you need to be an RSGB member to get to the link, where those are released. But again, obviously, it allows you to see the information that are available. Now it turns out the fact that the August ones had originally disappeared for some reason, so they're now back online for you to view. So as always, we'll put a link to that on icqpodcast.com for you. And we finish off news in brief this episode in Japan, where the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communication has decided to open up a amateur radio advisory board for wireless human resource development. So to put it mildly in non-political speech, this is again more efforts to increase the youth into the ham radio hobby. So the Japan Amateur Radio League president, a Mr. Yorishinori Takio, JG1 Kilo Tango Charlie, said the aim is to obtain advice and recommendations from experts on the development of an environment suitable for amateur radio in Japan that makes it much easier for beginners, such as youth who will lead the future, and to start in amateur radio in order to realise a system environment that makes it easier to utilise amateur radio. So they really open up their options there. They've already held their first meeting, and obviously, as always, we wish them luck in attracting new people to the hobby. Right, but now we're going to head over to our features episode, and we're going to chat with Dave CRUMP, Golf 8 Golf Kilo Quebec, on amateur television and the British Amateur TV Club. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys, this episode's feature, I am pleased to announce I have Dave CRUMP G8GKQ, who is the chair of the BATC. David, welcome on board.
Thank you very much, Martin.
So David, tell us about yourself, how you got into the hobby, because it's always nice to have a background of the person and how you got in, which sometimes is inspirational to new people coming into the hobby.
Yeah, I was lucky. My father was licensed, so I got a licence at a young age. I got a licence at 14 when I was living in South London. And I'd always had an interest in amateur TV as opposed to the HF that my father was more interested in. And ended up going to one of the VHF conventions in London and found a Valve TV camera for a £5. And it all started with that. Refurbished the Valve TV camera and was transmitting TV by the time I was 17, many years ago.
Right. Well, that sounds interesting. I think I mentioned to you on a pre-chat that I once had a 70 SEMS TV transmitter. Never used it. A friend of mine at the time, who's now a silent key, begged me could he borrow it, and then his house burnt down. And I hasten to add it wasn't my transmitter that caused the problem, but I never actually got to use it, David.
Yeah, I started with Valve cameras in those days, using Valve transmitter as well on 70 SEMS, and it's fairly easy to get going and using a standard TV tuner. So that was how I got into TV, and made slow progress since then, but I think we've made good progress.
Yeah, from what I can see, amateur TV has certainly moved on phenomenally. You know, I could never understand it, never having done it. A standard TV picture back in the day was about 8 megs wide. How did you get away with that on 70 SEMS when a signal...
Of course, in those days, 70 SEMS was a lot wider. We had at least 20 to start with. We had 30 megs. But actually, it really ages me in that I started on 405 lines, which wasn't so wide, of course. Within a year, we'd graduated to 625 lines and colour, but that got wider. But that wasn't sustainable, and we can perhaps talk about progress on that later in the talk.
Yeah, no problems at all. I'd showing my ignorance here, I hadn't realised that you had more bandwidth back in the day. As I say, I have worked on 405 line TVs, a long time ago I used to had, but they were still around when I was fixing them back in the 70s. So
with one hand in your pocket, I bet.
Oh, with one hand in my pocket. I've seen some people do some frightening things with TVs, and I think the worst shock I ever had was 8 kV through my thumbnail. That hurt. That was black and white focus voltage. That hurt.
I'm sure it did, yeah.
So you've always had an interest in TV, and what equipment do you use now, and how has it progressed from the early days to where we are now?
Okay, well, I can probably go through some of the history of it, really. It started off in about 70 years ago. The BATC was formed before amateurs were allowed to transmit TV, and it started campaigning for them to be allowed to do it. And that was using, of course, 4 or 5 lines on 70 SEMS. Moved on through the 70s into 625 lines in colour. And most of the activity back then was either 70 SEMS AM, which was very easy to get going, either with transistor or valve PAs. And there was a bit of activity on 10 gigs FM as well, because you could put the video almost straight into a gun diode and modulate on 10 gigs with it. As technology moved on, people moved to 23 centimetre FM, because around that time satellite broadcasting was just starting, and they were using FM TV on the satellite, so kit was available for that in the 80s. And of course on 23 SEMS we had the room to run the FM, which took up about 16 megs, so again, not very bandwidth friendly. Around that time, a number of repeaters were put on the air, mainly 23 SEMS in and out FM, but of course we could use the bottom end of 23 SEMS as the input and the top end as the output, which was far enough away. So that went on for, 10, 20 years. But around 2000, satellite TV had started to migrate to digital, which has been the great change in our hobby. And some surplus commercial satellite TV equipment started to become available on the encoding side, because that was always the difficult bit. And these early encoders were about 10U of a 19-inch rack, and about a foot high in a 19-inch rack, and would heat the shack very nicely. But some amateurs started using them on 70 SEMS. And the one thing we noticed was they really performed well, because you were using a smaller bandwidth. We could get down to 1.5 megs bandwidth. Because the bandwidth reduced, the paths we could work were much longer. And about 10 years ago we started taking this to a new level. We'd always up until then used broadcast standards and never really deviated from the broadcast standard. But we realised that we could extend the broadcast standard, not change it, but say the broadcast standard had a minimum symbol rate of 1 mega symbol per second. But there was no reason why we couldn't reduce that. We'd lose some picture quality, but in doing so we'd use less bandwidth and we'd increase path lengths even further. And we called this reduced bandwidth TV, and that's where we've got to today, in that in about 500 kilohertz you can put a high definition TV picture with 2 sound channels, using relatively cheap computers for both encoding and decoding. And that's the great technical advantage that digital has given us. Miniature equipment, reuse of consumer equipment, and very good quality pictures.
Yeah, I must admit, about 10 years or so ago, the club had a talk on ATV, and the guy came along and he showed us some phenomenal setups, and I'll be honest with you, it scared the hell out of most of us, because it just looked a really expensive part of the hobby to get into, And I suppose it's like everything. If you know where to find the gear, you know where to find the second-hand gear, then you have a much better chance.
Yes, now we've developed some projects where you can get the basis of a transmitter running for less than £200. So we're moving on to some things that are a lot simpler and will fit into people's shacks a lot easier, and also integrate with their other equipment. And I'll perhaps come on to that a bit later. But it might be worth talking about what we actually transmit over TV, because people think perhaps we just transmit test cards or we transmit movies or whatever, but actually a lot of the content that people put is just shack pictures of their latest project, in the same way as you talk on 80 metres or 2 metres of, I've just built this and I'm having this problem. Well, we do that, but with pictures, and it's really useful for people who are developing equipment, building their own equipment. They can say, here, I've got this. It looks great, but it doesn't work. And they stick the camera inside it, and you can see, you get a real feel for the equipment they've built, how they've built it, and perhaps what their problem is. So most of our ATV content is the same as you do for a rag-chewing voice contact, but with the added video there. Now, there are some exceptions to that. We do have a few people, it's a broad church, who are test card enthusiasts, and you'll see them come up with all sorts of old test cards that perhaps you'd recognise from your TV servicing days, Martin. There's also contest exchanges. In the same way as you have contests on voice and data modes, we have contests not very often, a couple of times a year. And one of the criteria for a contest exchange is that you send a 4-digit code that you only send by video. So that's how you prove you've had a TV contact rather than just had a voice contact. You only send a 4-number code by video. So that's the sort of content we do. Some people are into it for, let's make this thing work. They get some content across, they prove it works, and it goes on the shelf and they build the next thing. And some people are into rag chewing and talking for a long time. So there's both sides of the hobby there.
Yeah, well, I'm accused of being quite a rag chewer, so haven't quite made it down to 80 metres, and I'm sorry, guys, on 80 metres, I shouldn't rag you for it, but yeah, I'm quite a rag chewer and often spend hours talking to my colleague down in Western Australia on the digital mode. So this sounds sort of interesting in that if you can get together and do this with video, sounds interesting. And now you're saying it's starting to become more viable from an expense point of view. Yeah, I can see the attraction. Whereas, say, 10, 15 years ago, you'd have had to have enough equipment to fill half your house, and the power consumption would have been ludicrous, I would suggest.
Yeah, you can now use, if you've got an existing preamp, aerials, PA or transverter for 70 SEMS or 146 megs even, you can now use that equipment and just put the TV driver on the front of it instead of using your normal ICOM or Yaesu rig to drive it. You'd use the TV driver and put a mini tuner, which is our recommended receive solution, on instead of the receiver. Now the mini tuner is a single PCB satellite tuner that is capable of doing this reduced bandwidth TV I talked about, and it just connects by USB to a PC or a Raspberry Pi. There's an application for a Windows PC, there's a Linux app, and there's a whole Raspberry Pi build that works with that. Similarly, on the transmit side, we use the recommended entry-level solution is a Raspberry Pi running what we call the ports down software, which is freely downloadable online, or in fact you can get pre-built SD cards with it on. and use a Lime SDR or a Pluto SDR to actually generate the RF. You can then amplify that as required using your existing aerials. And using that sort of setup, you can work on any band from 29 megs, where we do have room for TV now. That's going to be quite a challenge to do the aerials for that, but people are looking at that, all the way up to 76 gigs. People have had successful contacts over 20 or so kilometers on 76 gigs using these modes. So that's the digital TV. There's still room, though, for doing analog TV. Many of you will have seen the 5.6 gig drone FM TV links they're used for getting video back down from drones. Most of those modules can actually be configured to work on a frequency in the 5.6 gig amateur band. And if you put a pair of those on 60 centimetre dishes, you can easily do 80 kilometres hilltop to hilltop. And the total cost at each end is probably in the order of 50, 60 quid. So it's something you can carry to the top of a hill and just have some fun with TV, doing really easy entry level stuff.
Well, that actually sounds very interesting, because when I first got licensed, I went out with a couple of guys that were big into the 10 gig microwave, and we'd set up on the hilltop, and I was really just the labour, the person, the horse carrying the stuff up the hill, and we'd set up, and you get people come by and they say, "You get BBC Two on that, mate?" You go, yeah, all right. But if you are actually transmitting and receiving TV, that would actually, those silly remarks you get from the general public would actually backfire a little bit on them, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it certainly would. And the remarks still happen. I get them regularly. The one great advance in the last couple of years, of course, is QO100, the geostationary satellite. Now, many people know that it's got a narrowband transponder on it, but there's also a wideband transponder that they've made available for us to use for TV. Now, of course, that covers geographically from India across to Brazil, a really wide area, really good. And with a sort of 0.8 metre dish and a normal domestic satellite LNB, you can get pictures from that and watch people, amateurs, across this side of the Earth. And that's a downlink is 10.49 gigs, so it's just at the edge of the passband of commercial LNBs and satellite dishes. So that is a really easy way to see what's going on. And the nice thing is the pointing angle for those is almost identical to Sky. So your neighbours think you've just put up a slightly bigger Sky dish. That's for the receiving side. If you want to transmit, you probably need a slightly bigger dish. I use a 1.2 metre dish, about 50 watts on 2.4 gigs, and that gets me really good high definition pictures into the satellite, again using the Raspberry Pi. So and that has transformed amateur TV over the last couple of years. If people want to see the content from that, occasionally it is streamed online. Every Thursday evening, the BATC host a net on the satellite, and we stream that on the BATC website. The URL will be in the notes, but it's batc.org.uk/live, and you just select the BATC Oscar 100 net, and you can watch the content live and see what we really do get up to. Now, that net tends to be UK focused because it's BATC hosted and most of our members are in UK. However, on every Sunday there's another net from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. That's UTC, and that's the QO100 worldwide net, and that's hosted by Saro, who's in India, and he gets a much broader geographical distribution of participants. And again, that's worth watching to see what other people are up to in other countries. That is generally on YouTube Live, and if you Google YouTube QO100 Worldwide Net, you will find it. So that satellite has really made a big difference to the way we're able to do ATV, Martin.
Yeah, certainly sounds it. And, okay, you're saying that the BATC is predominantly British, and I understand why. But when you did the club talk for us a couple of 2 or 3 weeks ago for Sutton and Jean, I know that fellow presenter of the ICQ podcast, Frank Howell, was there and was very impressed and very interested. And he lives in the States. And this will go to lots of other people in different parts of the world that may get excited about some of the things we're doing. And I assume membership to BATC is not going to be limited to UK only, I would have thought.
No, they would be very welcome to join BATC. We've got about 1,400 members currently, and only 1,000 of those are in the UK. The other 400 are overseas. Mainly, I would say, Australia, USA, Germany, Netherlands are the sort of centres of activity overseas, but all are welcome. We've got Japanese, Indian, Brazilian, all sorts of members. Clearly, we conduct most of our business in English, but we do actually have a German-speaking section on our forum. Perhaps it's time for me to talk a bit more about the BATC. Again, as I mentioned, it was formed about 70 years ago with the aim to enable and promote amateur television. And we're still doing that. It's non-profit, all staffed by volunteers. And I suppose our main focus is providing online information and services. We have a wiki, which is free for anybody to view. A forum, which again is free for anybody to join and contribute. You don't need to be a BATC member to post on the BATC forum, but you do need to sign up to the forum. We run the streamer. I mentioned earlier that the QO100 net is streamed live. The streamer also carries the output of a number of the ATV repeaters around the UK. So if you want to see what's going on your local ATV repeater, or indeed find an active ATV repeater, the streamer is probably the best place to go to. We've always found it difficult to keep track of exactly which repeaters are active at what time, because people keep losing sites and finding new sites. But the streamer is a good place for beginners to start. The other sort of thing we host the web SDR for QO100. Clearly we've got this 8 megs of bandwidth on the QO100 and we need to manage that somehow. So we actually host an SDR that shows the spectrum on the satellite so people know if frequencies are in use or not. And that's a companion device to the narrowband web SDR that you can actually listen to the narrowband transponder on. The wideband SDR doesn't show the pictures unless somebody chooses to stream them. We also run a shop selling hard-to-get bits. We don't sell anything for a profit. We don't sell anything that you can buy easily elsewhere. But if for a certain TV project you need 100, the manufacturer has a minimum purchase of 100 or 200. If it's justified, we'll buy 100 or 200 and pass them on to our members for refund of costs. I've mentioned projects there. We sponsor a number of construction projects. One of them is the Portsdown DATV transceiver. It started off as just a transmitter based on a Raspberry Pi with a touchscreen. It's now a transmitter, receiver, bit of test equipment, stream receiver, sort of jack of all trades for television. That only needs Raspberry Pi 3 or a Raspberry Pi 4, a official 7-inch touchscreen, and an SD card. Now you can build your own SD card if you're up to it, or for those who are scared of computers, and I was there once, you can buy a pre-programmed SD card from the BATC shop. They're only £10 each. That takes all the hassle out of it, and you just plug that in, and it'll you never need to go through near computer software. You just run the thing. The other stuff we do is BATC provides bursaries for repeaters, so we part fund a number of repeaters and other interesting amateur TV projects. For example, there's a group in Switzerland who've been using our TV technology to beam down pictures from their rocket launches. We've helped them. We also run an annual convention. We managed one this year in the gap between the COVID problems, and we aim to do another one. Sorry, we managed one in 2021. We aim to do another one this year in 2022. And if possible, we go to rallies and run stands at rallies. So we try and help people by being there to answer questions. The last thing we get up to is once a quarter we publish a magazine. Now, the most recent magazines are only available to members, but they're available either online or you can pay extra for a paper copy. And after 2 years, we put the older magazines on our website for everybody to see. So we're very much into getting the information about how to do TV out there and enabling people to talk to each other about it on the forum. And, no question is too stupid on the forum. We'd like to see other people on there. So BATC membership, not that expensive. £8 a year for just to get the magazine electronically. Unfortunately, postage and printing costs put it up to £20 a year for to get your 4 copies a year. But worth noting that anybody in full-time education can get free membership without the magazine, i.e. they can download the magazine online, but they can't have a printed copy. But we offer that free membership to anybody who's in full-time education. And they can get that by going to our website, which is batc.org.uk.
I would say, though, nowadays lots of people will be more than happy to have that as a downloaded device rather than wait for the printed copy to arrive. And I know what you're saying is there are cost advantages into producing it electronically. And if you live at the other side of the world, like Australia, you can be 6 or 8 weeks before that magazine arrives.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we moved to electronic, and every member gets the electronic format. So even if you want the printed ones to go in the cupboard and refer to later, you still get the electronic one the day it comes out.
Which is good news. And I like the idea of what you were saying about your shop there to assist. I know other groups do similar things, but it does make life a lot easier if you are able to source the strange parts that are not easily available. So that one to me sounds like a well worthwhile thing. Having a number of Raspberry Pis running in the house at this moment in time, I think somewhere around about 5 or 6. Yeah, Raspberry Pis certainly are devices that are certainly helping out in amateur radio a hell of a lot. And if you've got them as part of a transceiver, then they are generally easily available parts, aren't they, David?
Yeah, they are, and they are incredibly useful. The ports down hardware, if you use a Raspberry Pi 4 touchscreen and a Pluto, the hardware is compatible with running the Langston microwave transceiver software. So that gives you a basic transceiver that will work from 70 megs up to 6 gigs on the same hardware for almost no extra cost. So they are so flexible, and they have made such a lot of difference for us.
Yeah, that's the nice thing. And I know the Raspberry Pi was originally devised for the education market, But our hobby's about learning, so I see no problems in us taking advantage of it, the Raspberry Pi. I think they're a great device. A lot of people in amateur radio have written some nice software for them, not only for yourself, but for others. A great little device. Now, you mentioned going out portable. How often do you do that, or are there many people who go out portable?
We run, the BATC runs activity weekends just under one a month. Less in the winter, a bit more in the summer. And on those weekends, you probably get 10, 15 people out in the UK out portable, and a number of more people participating from their home station. The typical contacts from the south of England, Salisbury area, I can typically get up to Shropshire on a normal weekend, and if conditions are ever so slightly up, I can get up into Yorkshire. So it doesn't take that many people to go out portable on decent hills to cover the whole country.
Well, that sounds good. The other one I was thinking of is number of repeaters. Now, if I'm right, I think I have in South London a repeater in Bromley. I seem to remember there might be one at Stokenchurch on the M40, but I'm not sure. And I'm only going from memory here, but you seem to have quite a few repeaters around.
There are. I was trying to look at this earlier. I think there are about 15 active amateur TV repeaters. You're right, there is one in Bickley, just the other side of Bromley in South London. The one that was up at Stokenchurch is no longer there, unfortunately. The usual problem, we lose access to masts. But increasingly, we can use the streamer as both an entry point to repeaters and a way of people receiving repeaters. We perhaps don't need sites that are quite as good as we used to, because some people can just access the repeater electronically over the internet. It gets transmitted locally, and people can also watch the repeater on the streamer. So it expands the hobby out a bit. We've still got radio in there, but there's a mix of radio and internet.
Yeah, I understand, because our club has a repeater and I help the repeater keeper quite regularly. I must admit, and I'm being open now, it's on a site where we're very, very lucky. We get everything for free. Because it's seen as a community project on top of a local hospital. And when I offered to pay for the electricity, they went, yours is so little compared with everything else, we wouldn't even notice it. But in fairness, if we were a commercial operation, it would cost between £5,000 and £10,000 a year to put a aerial on top of a high building, and that's the sort of thing repeater keepers are up against. So, don't beat any repeater keeper up by the voice or ATV if they lose a site, because unfortunately the owners see commercialism in it, don't they, David?
They do, and it is an ongoing problem, but we do make best efforts to get ATV repeaters on the air, and we do find they really do encourage activity. Certainly, activity seems to grow in the areas of repeaters, around Lincoln, for example, around the Wirral. There are quite a few good groups of activity. But when it comes down to it, it's just another branch of amateur radio. It's a very broad church, and TV floats some people's boat and doesn't float others. But it's great that we've got the opportunity to do it as part of the hobby.
Yeah, sounds great. Now, obviously, if somebody's interested in getting started from scratch, I assume going to the BATC website would be their first port of call?
Yes, I'd recommend going to the website, having a look at the documentation there, the old CQTVs, have a read of a few of those. When I say old, they're only 2 years old. That's not very old. And if you're interested, join up. Get involved on the forum. We do have a section there where beginners can just say, is there anybody else in my area? Have a look for repeaters. And of course, if you get the opportunity, if we all get the opportunity to get back to rallies or even organise a BATC convention, come along and talk to us. Come along to the BATC stand and ask lots of questions. Start at the BATC website, take a look at the wiki, post on the forum, and also watch the online nets. Watch what's going on the repeaters and on the streamed Cure 100 net, to just get a feel for if that's the thing you want to do and who might be on locally to help you.
Well, that sounds great. So, as I think we've covered just about everything, unless you can think of anything else. What's the best way of contacting yourself if you want to be contacted, or what's the BATC website? Right,
the BATC website is batc.org.uk, and you can contact myself at chair@batc.tv. Really simple, chair@batc.tv, and I'd be very interested to hear from anybody who'd like to take up the hobby.
Well, that's great. David, I'm going to thank you for your time on this one. I think we've covered a lot, and I was very, very interested. This could be a project which I'm going to get involved with when I finish the one I'm working on at the moment. But no promises, but seeing as I have a TV background, I think I might look at this one. So you've certainly excited me, David.
Thanks very much, Martin. Thanks for the opportunity to talk.
Yeah, thank you. And listen, I'll say 73s to you. Thanks for the chat. And hopefully a lot of our listeners will have found this very useful.
73, Martin.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed our feature there with Dave CRUMP, Golf 8, Golf Kilo Quebec, on amateur TV and the work of the British Amateur Television Club. And we've got links for the club there on the show page on icqpodcast.com if you'd like to find out more about their activities. Well, Dad, I know you've been working hard on the digital group hardware and getting that configuration moving across, let's say, onto our own infrastructure and getting that nicely bedded in for us after, obviously, a couple of successful test runs. And I wonder where you're at now and what the current situation is.
Right. Well, yeah, it sounds like a broken record because that's kind of most of what I've done recently. But at right this moment in time, I said a fortnight ago that we were on our own hardware for most of this, and that the D-Star, DMR, Fusion, and NXDN were all live. Nothing changed there. In fact, if you were one of the people who heard me testing, the only time things were down was when I took them down to test. But I was listening to most of the other things, groups, just in case. So I only took one bit down at a time while I was testing. It wasn't down for long, so you shouldn't have had any outages, guys. But the hot off the press as of about yesterday, which would have been Friday the 28th, at about 4:30 in the afternoon, we switched to our own transcoder. So at this moment in time, we're running our own transcoder for D-Star. And, yeah, that's been a learning exercise, but we're now up and running on that. We thank support of everybody who's given us support on getting this to be done. In fairness, you and I have talked about a couple of things, and I've had a couple of ideas put my way. And I think in the next few weeks or so, we will maybe look to tidy up the installations a little bit, because there's still a few things that are not quite working, but not for the user. This is more for our monitoring, Colin. And yeah, then maybe we'll look towards other modes. So it's exciting times and it's working, Colin.
Yeah, exactly. As you say, there's a bit of simplification that can happen, and look, I'm sure anybody who's been involved in these type of projects, will know that there's always a learning curve, and there's always a bit of other stuff going on. So, I mean, the great news is say we've learned a lot. We've got a pretty stable system now, and it's about tidying it up and making it perform better. So, yeah, we're really looking forward to doing that work and getting that working from there for everybody. Right, well, we need to do some thank yous for this episode. We're going to start by thanking Wes Nairn for setting up a subscription donation to the ICQ podcast. Many thanks for doing that, Wes. Your support is greatly appreciated, and as I say, will continue to help us pay our costs here producing this show. You can do what Wes did by visiting icqpodcast.com/donate. As we always say, think of the value you get from the show, turn that into a monetary figure, and send it along our way. And as I say, we're always greatly appreciated for the help you guys give us in what we do. So, if you could please consider us, that'd be fantastic. We also would like to thank the guys that joined you in the News Roundtable. So we had Edmund, Mike November Golf, we had Ed DD5 Lima Papa, and we also had Leslie Golf Zero Charlie India Bravo joined us for News Roundtable. So many thanks, guys, for taking part from there. Right, well, I think that just about wraps up this show, episode number 369 for you of your ICQ podcast. And obviously now we just have the most important thing to do now, which is to now let you head off on your merry way, Dad, to think about the feature for the next episode and what you're going to be doing in a fortnight's time. But more importantly, make Mrs. B a cup of tea and maybe find a little treat in the cupboard, a chocolate biscuit or two.
Certainly will, Colin. It's about tea time again, so... yeah, let's go and find the kettle, make a nice cup of tea, find Mrs. B a chocolate biscuit, and put our feet up for a few minutes before I get back to doing other things. So, no problems at all, Colin. 73's from M1MRB.
Yeah, 73's all. Okay, you're on a fortnight's time, 73's all.